Hello and welcome to the jungle for round 3 in the Zwift National Road Series. Matthew Keenan with you, joined by Carlee Taylor. And Carlee, today we go around possibly the most famous circuit in Zwift, around Watopia into the jungle, 37 kilometres and lots of gravel road to contend with.
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty exciting race today, I think, Matt, and especially when it comes to bike choice. Last week we saw when the race went to the jungle circuit, those that chose a road bike had a pretty tough day out there. So it's going to be interesting to see how many riders have chosen gravel bikes or mountain bikes. And yeah, I think it's going to be a really exciting race on these gravel roads.
That was in the SRAM Send It series, and it was a lot shorter than what we're going to see today, 37 kilometres today, so 4 laps of the circuit. And in the lead group in the SRAM Send It series, there was only one rider, Alana Forster, who wasn't on a mountain bike. She was on a road bike, and she managed to just survive in that front group. In terms of the overall standings, it's pretty tight at the top of the leaderboard. This is not a point series, it's accumulated time. It's Justine Barrow who is the current race leader, and she holds on to just a 3-second advantage over Bree Wilson. So it's very tight at the top of the table. Georgia Whitehouse is in third position. She's right there amongst it as well, just 6 seconds behind. Nicole Frayne, who's been a big talking point early this year, she's in fourth position. Rounding out the top 5 is Vicky Whitelaw, the winner of the opening round. It's then Bree Hargrave, followed by Bree Vine, so active on Zwift. Chelsea Holmes, Taryn Heather, and Jenny Penttinen making it inside the top 10. Down to just on a minute and 15 seconds before they get started, Carlee, Justine Barrow, she's in a really strong position at the top of the overall standings.
Yeah, she was really impressive last race, finishing up the New York climb and taking the win there. And she is a really strong hill climber, and I think today she'll have a good race. I also think Georgia Whitehouse, though, she's in a really good position in third overall at the moment. And I know last time when she raced here, actually last year, she took out the win against a lot of these girls. So I think this type of circuit is going to suit one of those stronger type of riders that can maybe stay there over these climbs and then be able to have a fast finish. But definitely Justine Barrow is going to be a rider to watch during this series, and a lot of her rock salt attacker teammates too right up there as well, with Bree Wilson, her fellow teammate, just behind her in second.
10 seconds to go before they roll out, and the warm-up is serious for Justine Barrow. She's been punching out close to 200 watts as the countdown clock is about to hit 0, and they do make a start. They are underway. Justine Barrow is the series leader. You can see her in the SRAM kit, making it a little easier to spot her. And as you identified earlier on, Carlee, most of the riders that I can see so far up towards the front are riding mountain bikes, and that's on this course will be significant. Equipment choice is really important.
Yeah, the riders have about 5 kilometres until they reach that jungle circuit. So this first couple of kilometres, those on a mountain bike, they might struggle a little bit more, but then the rest of the race is on gravel. So definitely a lot of these riders, I think, have got the memo to make sure that they've got a gravel or mountain bike, and they've chosen well. Because, like you said, in the SRAM Send It series the other week, only one rider was able to stay in that front group, and that was when there was 2 laps, and today there's 4. So it's going to be a lot longer race, and that gravel section is going to be a lot more important.
And given that it is a longer race, it seems like a slightly calmer start to the race today. Justine Barrow, at the moment, the series leader, she's punching out a little over 200 watts, which is around about the sort of wattage that she was doing in the pens as she was warming up, with still just on 1 minute to go. So she'll be pretty comfortable with this sort of start. It's going to be a patience game for her, I imagine, throughout the first half of the race at least.
Yeah, this race, I think you really want to save as much energy as you can on the descents of the course and the easier part. So this is a bit downhill, this first couple of kilometres. So she's riding smart, I think. But yeah, I think this course too, it's very much, it's either up or it's down. So those riders who make the use of that downhill and save energy are going to be those riders that are going to be there at the the end of the race.
Good to see the name of Peter Mullins up towards the front. Georgia Whitehouse also riding towards the front of the race. She's somebody that you can always count on this format or in real life, or as I'm discovering, the new acronyms in this sport coming across from gaming, IRL. As I got a mention or a message from Brendan Johnson a couple of weeks ago, Tricky, can you mention that I'm the IRL leader of the NRS?
Yeah, welcome to the world of Swift and acronyms. But yeah, it's been awesome seeing so many of these riders that are racing, like started the season off so well. And Georgia Whitehouse, she was racing really well in January and at the Tour Down Under. And I know that she was really focusing on Cape Epic on the mountain bike. So now she just gets to race that bike in Swift. And I've just been told also that there's no riders that are actually on a road bike in this race this morning. So they've all gotten the memo and chosen well.
They've made that decision based on what we've seen in the Tram Send It series, which incidentally, that's 3 races into the 8-race series. That's each Tuesday night Australian time. And all you have to do to go in with a chance to win one of the group sets from SRAM is ride every single one of those races. You don't have to be at the front. You just have to be on the start line. The name of Bree Hargrave has shown itself up towards the front. And Bree has been riding pretty well. She sits in 6th position in the overall standings, and she's just a little over 17 seconds, 18 seconds or so behind the series leader, Justine Barrow.
Yeah, she has come from the
up towards the front. Sorry, Carlee. Go for it.
No, I was just going to shout out how awesome it is to see so many of the South Australians up there. And I know that, Bree Hargrave does come more from that track background. And, making that more transition into the road. And now with the Subaru team helping to develop a lot of the youngsters too, it's been awesome to see that development of women's cycling and a lot of the women's teams growing in support as well, coming from male teams of the NRS.
And that's really good with the ARA Ride the Sunshine Coast team as well. The team that we see Michael Freeberg ride for example, on the men's side of things, the Australian champion from a couple of years ago. Initially, when they started, it was a men's team. In the last year or so, they've expanded to be a men's and a women's team, and they've got some really strong riders in this race, and they're really developing on the road in real life racing as well. And they had a fantastic start to the year, particularly with Ruby Roseman Gannon, who's been so good when it comes to a technical race finish.
Yeah, Maeve Plouffe also, you mentioned, we're just looking at her number and heart rate now, which is almost at 190 beats per minute. But last week, she was right up there towards the finish of the NRS, and being a hilltop finish might not have suited her as much in race 2, but I think she just got named as part of the Olympic team for the track endurance team, and she's a pretty impressive rider, I think, coming up and to watch. And today, if she can hang in there over those rises, could be one that might make a sneaky move towards the finish.
You mentioned the heart rate just a moment ago when talking about her. From the second race that we saw, where it was the after party with the climb in New York, the highest heart rate we saw, that was courtesy, and you'll be pleased with this, Carlee Taylor, of a South Australian. Ali Anderson from the South Australian Sports Institute. She had an average heart rate of 194 beats per minute, but she had a max of 214. Incredible numbers.
Yeah, especially when you consider the calculation when they say 220 minus your age is normally the max watts you've got. So, I mean, the max heart rate. But yeah, I think it's been some definitely hard racing out there. And I know a few of my friends have actually been racing this series as well as the SRAM Send It series. And I think the general consensus is you start hard, then you go harder, and then you sprint at the end. So it's a solid session for these ladies racing.
It sounds like the Annemiek van Vleuten strategy for any race that she actually rides. Doing interviews with her before a race. So, Annemiek, what will the strategy be? At the start, we go full gas. In the middle, we go as hard as we can. And then we finish a block at the end. Everything is as hard as she can go. Watching Maeve Plouffe from the ARA team, the team based out of the Sunshine Coast, she looks to be pretty comfortable sitting there in the middle of the group, riding around about 4 watts per kilo. Carlee, you know racing in this format a lot better than I do. Using power-ups strategically is crucial to being able to win. Take us through them.
Yeah, so the riders would just have received their first power up there, and they're going to be able to get 4 in total during this race when they cross that lap line, and that lap line is also the finish line of today's race. So they're going to get that run in of knowing the sprint for a couple times before they actually do it at the end. But there's going to be a few too that are going to be a bit more beneficial today. The lightweight feather power up actually makes a rider about 10 kilos lighter for 15 seconds. So that's really good to be used, obviously, up the climb of the race. And then the drafting boost and the aero boost are really 2 good ones that increase the draft effect or the aerodynamic of the avatar, the aerodynamics by about like 30 seconds. So if they're wanting to use that coming into the sprint, or if they have that, then the best way would be to use that coming into the sprint. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I think in these situations, it's just you don't want the more XP.
Yeah, and the use of them, the timing of the use of them is so important. And I've seen that particularly throughout the Transcendent series. On Tuesday night just gone, in the men's race in particular, it was the timing of the use of that power-up that made the difference really to get the victory. Whereas in the women's race over the last 2 weeks, it's been a dominant performance by the Dutch woman, Antoinette de Jong, who incidentally comes from a speed skating background where she's got Olympic Games bronze medal. But it was Tom Button in the men's race who just got the timing right with the use of his power-up, and it expired right on the finish line at the end of the sprint. So it was an awesome use of that power-up, and it can be the difference between 1st and 10th.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes to, if those riders that are a bit more experienced with Swift racing and know the distance to the finish line a bit better and the timing of it all, it is a big strength to them and an advantage. And so riding this course before and learning from other races that they've done and how to use it, like running up, like using it as a run up as well, when you then get that bit of a draft and then a boost off the avatar. It is a tactical game, and I think just the smart way of also thinking about the power-ups is just you're always trying to maintain that speed in game. So when your speed starts dropping off, that's when you want to start using that lightweight power-up, for example, up a hill, not at the bottom when you're already going so fast.
Well, Hayley Fuller's been going pretty quickly. She's the rider that's been setting the tempo at the front. She's part of the incredibly strong Sydney Uni Staminade team. And this is a team that's been performing well here. They've been performing really well in real life as well. They've got some experienced riders on their team, Vicky Whitelaw, Georgia Whitehouse. And this is the team that collected 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in race 1. And they've also got Nicole Frayne, who's really well placed in the overall series. She's sitting in 4th position. They have Georgia Whitehouse in 3rd place overall and Vicky Whitelaw in 5th place. So the team overall, as we're focusing on one of their riders, Hayley Fuller, has been riding brilliantly. And this is a strong move by Hayley Fuller.
Yeah,
Meanwhile,
this is the first time
one rider that's a bit of reality out the back. This is more the position that we might find somebody that hasn't quite had the same preparation as those at the front.
Yeah, you can see that the riders are just hitting the climb of the course now for the first time, and a lot of them are using that lightweight power up that we mentioned that reduces the avatar by 9.5 kilos for 15 seconds. So this is definitely the harder part of the course. It's about a 3% average gradient, so not too steep, but it does go for a couple of kilometres. So it's long enough to definitely do some damage. And I think the fact that they do it 4 times this morning definitely will make those last 2 laps a lot harder. You can see the hill climbers are making their way to the front with Taryn Heather, Justine Barrow, Vicky Whitelaw as well.
And Brie Vine is also coming up towards the front. And this looks like a technical problem for Georgia Whitehouse. This is not good. We have mechanical problems and technical problems. So you can get the double barrel in Zwift racing. That's really disappointing because she's well placed in the overall standings. Georgia Whitehouse starts today's race in 3rd position overall, just 6 seconds behind Justine Barrow. And unfortunately, Carlee, there's no team car with a sticky bidden a la Vincenzo Nibali from the Vuelta a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a real shame, especially as you say, Matt, that the GC is based on time, and in Zwift racing it's going to be really hard to try to get back on this peloton if she's had a technical issue, which definitely it looks like it.
There was one of the triathletes that was... Yeah, one of the triathletes, Carlee, was doing an event early on in the coronavirus lockdown. I can't quite remember who it was. Her name escapes me, but she was near the end on the bike leg and her husband walked behind the Wahoo kicker and tripped over the cord and disconnected it. And so that was the end of her event.
I heard that story too, and I'm trying to think of where we must have both heard that from. But yeah, that's never ideal. So they just actually, the riders now have crested that top.
Yeah, and we're seeing Nicole Frayne coming up towards the front. She's a rider that we've spoken about a lot throughout the virtual racing format. And thanks to Denise, she's just let us know it was Miranda Caffrey was the triathlete who had that incident with her husband kicking the cable out at the back of the Wahoo kicker. But Nicole Frayne, she's been really good in this series and she sits in 4th position overall. She's 16 seconds behind in the overall standings. I'm looking forward to seeing how she goes in the individual times trial stage at Bologna.
Yeah, she's been racing really consistently and really well on Zwift these last couple of weeks. Had a fair few podiums in both the NRS as well as the SRAM Send It Series races that are happening at the same time. So, and yeah, I think from when we've seen her race in real life in the NRS series, she's been a really strong time trialist as well as a hill climber. So she is in a good position for the remaining stages of this tour in Zwift. And yeah, I think you're right, Matt, with regards to the Bologna time trial will be one that suits her, but also maybe some of her teammates like Vicky Whitelaw as well, because I know Vicky knows how to time trial and she's another favourite, I think, during this series, being such an experienced racer on Zwift. She's level 50 on Zwift, which she can't get any higher than that. And she races a lot of the Pro-Ams as well. Yeah.
That's a lot of time on the bike, level 50. That is extraordinary. And that, incidentally, that Bologna time trial, which was actually used in the Giro d'Italia last year, it's also the same destination that was a happy hunting ground for Simon Gerrans in 2009 at the Giro d'Italia, when he was in a breakaway of around about 16 or so riders. Chris Froome was in the breakaway and a hilltop finish, and it was Simon Gerrans who won the stage, and Chris Froome was at 36 seconds behind. Chris Froome has gone on, of course, to win the Giro and the Tour de France 4 times, but finally, Froome redeemed himself by winning a stage at the Giro a few years later after it was Simon Gerrans who got the better of him.
I love hearing all the information you know, Matt.
That's a nice one for Simon Gerrans. Actually reflects on that really nicely. I did a podcast with him earlier this week for L'Etape Australia by the Tour de France, and he said at the time nobody expected Chris Froome to win the Tour de France and be the dominant force he has been. And now when he reflects on those results and he sees the result sheet with Chris Froome in the minor placings, that win at the Giro d'Italia has elevated it a little bit in terms of the many victories that Simon Gerrans has had. Meanwhile, Carlee, this group is getting reduced. It's starting to thin out, and we're not even halfway through the race. We're 11.4 kilometres into a 37-kilometre race.
Yeah, I do think this circuit was going to probably come into a more of a reduced bunch sprint, and we're seeing a fairly reduced bunch there as well. So, I think all the favourites, so looking at those riders, Hayley Fuller up there, Justine Barrett, Eloise Sandow, she's a really strong up-and-comer junior that raced really well at Ballarat and also got second at the Tour of Bright in B grade towards the end of last year. So a strong climber. Matilda Reynolds, I think, might just be there as well.
It was good to see Bobby Mack has also joined the conversation on social media, and he's nailed it by identifying that one time up the climb and already half of the race has been dropped. Good to see race with Emily Watts up towards the front, another one of the youngsters out of New South Wales, and she's going really well in this series and the SRAM Send It series. There's a lot to like about her, Carlee.
Yeah, she had a pretty bad crash last year, and I was really impressed with actually what a mature way she coped with it and how positive she coped with it too. And then, I think she's someone really I have a lot of respect for, but also someone to watch in the future, because she was just so disciplined and mentally strong in how she used Zwift to come back, and then to see her do so well in January at Nationals and racing so well here. She does use Zwift a lot for her training as well as racing, and I think that's just showing in how well she's been doing in these series. So it's been awesome to see a few of these younger ones racing in these Zwift races, but not just making up the numbers, but making an impact. And I think there's a bright future in Australian cycling with a few of these coming up.
And Emily, she recently did the virtual Everesting on Zwift, which is really, really tough. That takes somewhere in the vicinity of 11 hours. So not only physically tough, but Carlee, the mental fortitude that you need to complete an Everesting performance on Zwift is right up there.
Yeah, I think Everesting in real life and outside is hard enough, yet alone when you're in your lounge room and not really moving. But I think it marked the 1 year anniversary of her crash and her coming back. So it was a big milestone for her, and a lot of her teammates and friends jumped in and supported her in joining a few times up the Alpe to Zwift. So definitely though, one that very few people have done, but very impressive, and kudos to her for getting that.
And here's a look at the course. You know this course well. It's possibly the most famous on Zwift, into Watopia, into the jungle, and it's taken all of my strength not to break out to an Axl Rose Guns N' Roses Welcome to the Jungle. But you take us through the course, Carlee.
Yeah, so the first part of the course is where you do get that about 3 kilometre hill, and then the top is signified by that the swinging bridge, and then for the rest of the course it's more downhill when they then leading into that start finish area. So each lap is about 8 kilometres long, and they're doing 4 laps of that. So definitely that hill is going to be taken its toll, and I think this group is going to just be getting smaller and smaller every time they get to it. So it looks like they're just going to be coming into completing their first lap quite soon.
We've seen a lot of Hayley Fuller up towards the front, consistently riding in the first couple of riders. She's showing a real sign of strength today.
Yeah, we have been seeing her a lot, and I don't know if maybe she might be doing a team role, riding for Sydney Uni Staminade and those ladies having so many riders up there in the top 10. If she's if she's been given that role of setting the pace for these early laps to try to make it hard. So when maybe Vicky Whitelaw or Nicole Frayne, as we've talked about earlier as well, might make a move. So they are on the hill for this second time. And
this is Bree Wilson, Carlee. She looks like she's used the featherweight. She's made the most of one of the power-ups, and she's really accelerating. And it's Hayley Fuller who is trying to go with her. This is a serious move, Carlee Taylor.
Yeah, they've got a pretty good gap. It looks like Nicole Frayne is trying to bridge across, but Hayley Fuller, she's been riding the front the whole time. And when Bree Wilson made that move, she was able to cover, which is pretty impressive. She's really riding strong today. But it looks like Bree Wilson and Hayley Fuller have a 3-second gap on that chasing peloton. So, yeah, this is second time up the course, up the climb, and definitely now it's starting to get a bit more interesting, and already we're seeing these attacks going.
Well, importantly, it's Justine Barrow who is doing the chasing, because in the overall standings for the National Road Series on Zwift, Bree Wilson is in second place overall. She's just 3 seconds behind Justine Barrow. And as they sit right now, she is the virtual race leader in virtual racing on Zwift. Seems fitting.
Yeah, Bree Wilson also, she's very, very experienced on Zwift, and last year she took out our SRAM Send It series, and I know that these series also means a fair bit to her. So, yeah, it's awesome to see her having a really good go at the moment, and definitely I don't think Sydney Uni Staminate are happy to let her go, because they know how strong she is, and it looks like even though they have that teammate there with Hayley Fuller, that they are trying to bridge the gap and try to bring it back. But it's actually bridged out to 9 seconds now to this chasing group, with Anna Booth from Sydney Uni Staminate just there on the front trying to close it.
Yeah, it's growing. It is expanding that advantage. It's out towards the 10-second mark. Justine Barrow is at the front of that main peloton doing the chasing. Bree Wilson and Hayley Fuller, the two riders off the fronts. At this point, not quite at the halfway mark of the race, if you had to give a most combative prize or a most aggressive prize, hands down, Hayley Fuller would take that prize. She has been outstanding today.
Yeah, she has. And I think it's still, though, 20 kilometres left in the bike race. It is, if they stay away, it is going to be a very impressive ride. But both ladies, they're sitting around 5 watts per kilo, which is pretty impressive. And, yeah, we can't really see their faces when it comes to avatars. But when at 6 watts and 5 watts per kilo, that is definitely up there in women's power to weight ratios. So, yeah, and that gap now is even extending to 11 seconds. So, yeah, awesome ride by Hayley Fuller and Bree Wilson for giving a go a bit earlier on.
I can take a guess at the expression that would be on their face, and I think it might be twisted. Under the pressure, this is enormous. And in Zwift language, this 20-kilometre breakaway, it's kind of an Annemiek van Vleuten style move with her 100-kilometre breakaway at the World Championships. This is a long way to go in this format.
Yeah, 20 kilometres can seem like a long way when you're riding flat out and above your threshold. But, yeah, at least there's 2 of them so that they can help. Hopefully that helps a little bit with them staying away, as we're just seeing a few riders now that impacted the hill and the attack, causing a few riders to lose contact with that front group.
This is Anya Lowe, who we're on board with. She rides for the ARA Sunshine Coast team. She's got Matilda Reynolds with her, who's more known as a sprinter. Also in this group is Francesca Sewell, one of the youngsters in the race. She's still eligible for the junior category. Elena Fowler it is, who's at the back of that group. So this is a good little group. Alana Forster is there as well. It's a pretty handy little group, but they've got a gap to try and close down just to get back to the main part of the peloton, which includes the overall series leader, Justine Barrow.
Yeah, it looks like they're about 7 seconds behind that group. But the problem is now this front group has crested the climb and they're on a faster section of the course and starting to go downhill. So I think it's going to be hard for them to bring it back. But if they work together, you never know. Things do
I
happen
think
in bike
Francesca
racing.
Sewell actually. Yeah, Carlee, I think Francesca Sewell is still in contact with the main peloton, and she is one of the youngest riders in the race, so that is a fantastic sign. Nicole Frayne, Justine Barrow, Vicky Whitelaw, all pretty much together towards the front of the race.
Yeah, and that gap now is 15 seconds to those front two. But it looks like this front group of Justine Barrow and Nicole Frayne, they all are trying to bring it back. This is the faster part of the circuit. And we also see Brie Vine there, right up there as well, which is a rider we haven't spoken about much this morning so far. But she actually got second on this circuit just last week in the SRAM Send It series and is a very experienced Swifter. So I think her experience and her strength too would help in helping this chase to bring back these two riders.
Well, it's a good tactical move as well from the Rock Salt attacker team because we have Brie Wilson off the front, who starts the race second place overall, 3 seconds behind Justine Barrow, who is her teammate. And I've got it on good authority from Andrew Gray that Justine Barrow is adamant that she is not chasing her teammate, Brie Wilson. It can be a little bit more difficult on this platform to control not going to the front because you're riding to stay near the front, and every now and then that has you actually roll to the front, so it can look in virtual racing as if you are going to the front, whereas when you're actually on the road you can just dab the brakes and make sure that you don't appear to go onto the front. But we've got it on good authority that Justine Barrow is not chasing Brie Wilson, who is at the front and extending her advantage, a lead that has now gone out to 12 seconds.
Yeah, there is sometimes a little bit of lag, and I know that a lot of riders are trying to just stay there and then they accidentally move to the front, which obviously we can't see that. But yeah, it's awesome to see her letting Brie Wilson have a bit of a go and them playing such a team role. They do have quite a strong team, and I think also awesome team leader and captain with Peter Mullins as well, who's very experienced and helps, I think, when it comes to these tactics and getting it right. But yeah, very strong move here that we're seeing by these ladies, and that gap just keeps on going slightly out as now it's 14 seconds. So these riders are. You go, Matt.
Yeah, it looks like they're working together as you do on the road. They're just continuing swapping off at the front, and it makes a real difference, Carlee, to be able to work together like this in such a two-up breakaway.
Yeah, and in Swift, just like in the real life, you do get a bit of that drafting benefit by having another avatar there. So it means when the other rider does go in front of one, it does make it a little bit easier for the second rider. So it definitely does help then in helping this stay away, as you get that slight little reprieve in recovery when you're sitting on. But still, obviously, quite a hard effort. As we're seeing this chasing group now, the heart rates of a lot of these riders are right up there as they're definitely not letting it get away. They're chasing, but I think these two riders up the road are just super strong this morning.
And just back on that topic of working together, it's actually psychologically a lot easier to have somebody work there with you.
Yeah, for sure. And we've been talking a lot about Brie Wilson, but and obviously Hayley Fuller, but she actually was the under-19 crit and road national champion as well. So definitely not just someone that is a workhorse, but someone that could also maybe get her first Swift podium.
Yeah, it's snuck under the radar. I was there. I was calling those races. It it passed me by. I forgot about those performances in Ballarat. It seems like a lifetime ago after the COVID lockdown, but she is absolutely one of the rising stars of Australian cycling, Hayley Fuller. She's the one in the pink colours from Sydney Uni Staminade. And regardless of what the outcome of this stage is, I really like the attitude that we're seeing from Hayley Fuller. But Carlee Taylor, we're now seeing that main peloton. They're closing it back down. It's just 4 seconds the advantage for the 2 leaders.
Yeah, this is the part of the circuit that they've done the descent and the faster part, which is, I think, where their gap extended. But now it's more that slightly uphill and a bit more undulating before the climb of the lap. So, yeah, the gap has dwindled down quite a bit this last K or so, which just shows the panic that was in that front group in making sure that they didn't let these riders get too far up the road, because they know, I think, how strong these 2 ladies are. So they'll just be crossing the lap banner coming up quite soon. And that's where the riders will get another opportunity to get a power up. As we're seeing Hayley Fuller, she's just using one now. And that just means that you can actually get another one when you cross that line. If you have one that you want to keep, then you normally, if you cross the line, you can't get another one. So some just get rid of it if they are wanting to try to get another power up or a different power up that they think could help them in these last couple of laps, sorry.
And here comes the peloton. Strategically, what would your advice be to the 2 leaders at this point as the main group is now breathing down their neck?
I would say, having made such a hard move, probably I would just keep on going, because I think if I got caught at this point, I probably wouldn't be able to go again. So if they get over this next climb, then it could blow out again, and they are going to be approaching this climb quite soon. So they still have a chance. They still have a bit of a gap. And if they get a lightweight power up, for an example, and help keep that speed over this next climb, then maybe it actually won't come back. I've seen many races where a breakaway think they almost get caught, but they don't. And they end up actually staying away. And the peloton had probably been, 2 seconds behind them at one point, but the ladies or the riders didn't give up. So, yeah, it's not over until you get caught.
And I agree
awesome.
With Dennis Shaw, Pat's dad. Great ride here from Fuller. Absolutely. And she's still in the under-19s. Get used to the name, Hayley Fuller from the Sydney Uni Staminade team. This is an impressive performance. And we said it about 5 kilometres ago, maybe earlier than that, Carlee, that she'd be the most combative rider in this race. And we've still got roughly 15 kilometres to go, and she is full throttle at the front. And once again, we're seeing their advantage is going back out. We're seeing Fuller and Wilson out to a 14-second advantage, with the peloton being led by Taryn Hedder.
Yeah, they're on the climb now for this 3rd time round. And I think when it's about that 14 seconds, it's very hard when someone's going to have to probably sacrifice themselves. And I don't know if these ladies are talking to each other during the race on things like Discord or a Zoom call, but it's probably a little bit harder to communicate who might be doing that in Swift when there's a situation like this, because I think there has to be a team that starts to get organised and, commits to a full-out effort in order to bring these ladies back. Otherwise, I think they have a hope and a really good chance of staying away.
I think they're a really big chance to stay away, and it can be really difficult to communicate if you're the one actually doing the communicating. This is where you need your own personal sports director to do the communicating with somebody else who is in the race. As I was one of the guest lead riders on the Tour for All a couple of times, and trying to communicate at 170 beats per minute with sweat dropping onto the screen, the amount of typos in my communication was embarrassing, Carlee.
Yeah, we've been doing a few Swift races actually, like with the the Swift staff, and we've been having a Discord channel, and my communication has just been all very heavy breathing whilst I've been riding flat out. And so the guys don't hear anything. They just presume that I'm just trying to hang in there. So, yeah, definitely communicating in a Swift race is a lot harder, I think. But you can see this gap now is actually, it's 24 seconds. So it has really extended out a bit further, and they'll be almost cresting the climb now, these two riders, which means they'll be starting the descent and probably increasing that gap even further while that front group is still climbing.
And the good news for Hayley Fuller is that she'll have the advantage of being able to hear from Vicky Whitelaw, who is one of the most experienced in terms of racing on Zwift and in the real world, because the Sydney Uni Staminade team, they've thrown a lot of resources behind this. They're taking the racing seriously. They have race radio connected via Discord. So Vicky Whitelaw, who we're on board with now, can communicate with the other riders on that team. Carlee, I love it.
Yeah, it's a massive advantage, I think, to have that bit of communication, and especially from such an experienced Swifter with Vicky Whitelaw. So it's working so far. Like, Hayley Fuller is riding an amazing race, and also Sydney Uni Staminator in a really good position overall. And in the first round of the NRS, we saw them take first, second, and third in the race. And last week, or race 2, we saw Rock Salt Attacker dominate a little bit more. So I think that Sydney Uni Staminator wanting to make their mark again today and take out the win. And I think they're riding a very impressive race so far. And it's going to be interesting to see what comes in this final lap and a half.
And it was Vicky Whitelaw who won the first race in the National Road Series on Zwift. And she said afterwards that was the first National Road Series event that she'd won since 2007, when you finished second to her at the Canberra Milk Race.
Yeah, times go fast, but it's... Yeah, she was always a very strong competitor in hill climbing as well as time trialing, and it's just awesome to see her still right up there against these ladies now that we're both a little bit older, and her just still taking it to them and being able to podium. So, yeah, I'm definitely in awe, and think I get nervous just watching it from this side of it, and I'm not even racing. So no, it's really good to see her still in the sport and helping these youngsters, and helping just develop and grow the women's cycling in Australia. But that first group really has dwindled down. Now it looks a lot smaller than what we saw after lap 1. But a lot of the favourites still there with Nicole Frayne.
Yeah, and look at the gap now, Carlee Taylor. 44 seconds, the advantage for Hayley Fuller and Bree Wilson. And Pat Shaw can't help himself. He'll be joining me for commentary in the men's race. He's also joining online, making comments on social media about this performance. He's particularly impressed with Hayley Fuller, who, Pat reminds us, she dominated the under-19s at the National Championships in Ballarat at the start of the year. Such a strong performance, particularly in the road race.
Yeah, it's awesome seeing Pat tune in, warming up and watching what's going to happen in this women's race ahead of the men's race. But definitely is a pretty impressive performance by her this morning. And I think now 45 seconds is a big gap in Zwift, and with only just over a lap remaining as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, I think, this time round, if these riders still keep working together, these two ladies, or if they start thinking about how they could win the bike race, and if one prefers to go solo or not. So yeah, it's really exciting and such an awesome move. Something that I didn't expect, definitely so early in the bike race, to have two ladies go up and put this kind of gap into such a strong field.
Well, Brian Mull has summed it up pretty succinctly: crushing it. That's exactly what they're doing. So if you're now in that second group, Carlee Taylor, you'd probably be thinking about racing for third place on this stage, because 41 seconds is a huge gap to try and make up.
Yeah, I think probably unless you have some teammates or are in a team that are wanting to bring this back, but with the two strongest teams, Rock Salt Attacker and Sydney Uni Staminate, both represented in that breakaway, they're the two teams that probably could have brought it back. And when they're not working, then and you're not in one of those teams, then it's definitely going to be a race for third, I think.
It is a big gap out in front. This is Nicole Frayne that we can see back in this group. We're on board with Taryn Heather. She's riding at 3.5 watts per kilo at the moment, a little bit more than that. Sam Dorita from ARA Race Sunshine Coast, also up the front. These are the overall standings coming into the race. Justine Barrow of Rock Salt Attacker leading by 3 seconds, ahead of her teammate Bree Wilson, who's in the breakaway and is now the virtual real race leader. Georgia Whitehouse in third at the start of today's stage, followed by Nicole Frayne, Vicky Whitelaw, Bree Hargrave, then Bree Vine, Chelsea Holmes in 8th position, Taryn Heather and Jenny Pentonen making up the top 10. In the overall standings, as we're covering race 3 in the National Road Series on Zwift. Here are our two leaders at the front. It is Bree Wilson, who's moving into the overall series lead, and the young star who dominated the national championships in the under-19s, Hayley Fuller. This is turning out to be a dominant performance.
Yeah, I think this race is going to see a real shake-up in the overall GC. Unfortunately, it looked like Georgia Whitehouse had a technical difficulty earlier in the stage with her coming into the stage in the third. And, yeah, Bree Wilson moving on up in this breakaway. And the thing that also is important to note is whatever gap they get from this group is also the gap that is added to their overall GC. So it puts them in a really good position for especially Bree Wilson ahead of the final couple of stages, with a time trial in Bologna coming up as well, which is a hilltop finish, which should also suit her.
The next round is around Richmond, the World Championship course from a few years ago, which was the course where Peter Sagan first won one of his 3 world titles, and that is a pretty challenging course.
Yeah, that is also very undulating, and I remember watching that World Championship, and definitely those hills on the course did do a lot of damage. So I think each race, though, has been quite difficult. I don't think any Swift race is easy, but does lend itself having a few of these hilltop finishes to a more all-round athlete. So I think this is the type of tour that I normally like, when it has a couple of hilltop finishes and really hard hills in it as well, which is awesome that they were added for this series.
And Hayley Fuller, who's in that leading group, she must have had some sort of a mechanical or technical problem in race 1 or race 2, because she sits at some 16 minutes or so behind the overall race leader, Justine Barrow. And based on the performance that we've seen from the young star today, it won't have been physical. But what we're seeing from her is her full potential coming to the fore. This is an absolute joy to watch.
Yeah, and we're just hearing too that Georgia Whitehouse did have a power dropout, but a few of her teammates have actually dropped back and trying to help her, to cheering her on and help her kind of have a few avatar wheels to sit on to try to reduce that gap as much as possible, which is awesome to see that teamwork there as they kind of come towards the end of the third lap. So they'll be getting just 1 lap to go, which means one more time up that climb. And yeah, about that 6 kilometre mark to the finish.
And Eliza Politis, she's also in this group. She's just 17 years of age, one of the youngest, if not the youngest rider in the race. And she's from the Sydney Uni Staminate team, the same team as Hayley Fuller. And she was the 2nd place finisher at the National Championships this year. So this is a team that is doing a brilliant job of bringing together the experience of the likes of Vicky Whitelaw and Georgia Whitehouse, and the youth and the promise of the future of Australian cycling, such as Hayley Fuller and Eliza Politis. Those two young riders are in really good hands in terms of riders for them to learn from.
Yeah, it's awesome seeing such young talent coming up and also having a few more development pathways for these young riders and learning from those older riders. I think, like, I know when I was coming through, there wasn't that many teams, if any, actually, to learn off. We were racing more as individuals and as states. So having these setups, I think just really helps with that progression. And yeah, it's just awesome to see that. You're seeing that front group too now, really.
Yeah, and there's one lap to go, Carlee. This is Hayley Fuller at the front, followed by Bree Wilson, who's moving herself into the overall series lead. And the two most dominant teams have come to the fore, Rock Salt Attacker and Sydney Uni Staminade. They've dominated race one and race two, and now they're dominating race three as a combined effort.
Yeah, and these two ladies too, they're riding really strong up the front. They're climbing at around that 5 watts per kilo, which to put in our terms, I guess, a normal person would probably ride at about 1.8 watts per kilo. And a world-class athlete is around that 5 to 5.5 watts per kilo. So their effort here is like world-class. It's really impressive how strong they're riding. And I think, like, it just shows also the strength of Australian cycling. But yeah, it has dwindled down a little bit with that gap now being 38 seconds to that chasing group. But I think that's also because they've been on the climb that little bit longer. And you're seeing Justine Barrow now trying to make a move from that group and riding at 7 watts per kilo and just putting in a bit of a gap to Vicky Whitelaw and Nicole Frayne.
And this is a smart move by Justine Barrow, one of the most experienced riders in the race. She leads the series at the start of the race today, but that will go across to her teammate Bree Wilson to move to the top of the overall standings. But this is a move by Justine Barrow that can secure her spot in second position in the general classification. But not surprisingly, there's a big reaction behind her to try and close it down. And it's Vicky Whitelaw who is leading the chase. Carlee Taylor, she is almost on the wheel.
Yeah, it looks like this attack, she might have been caught by a few riders, but it has made a select group off the front there with Nicole Frayne as well, Bree Vine right up there also. So looks like there's about 5 riders now that are trying to bridge off the front. And this is a smart move, especially if you don't consider yourself a sprinter, as they're still fighting for overall general classification here, and a lot of those GC riders are right up there in riding for third.
Vicky Whitelaw is certainly one of them. She starts the day in 5th place overall, and she's the one who's communicating with the rest of the riders from Sydney Uni Staminade. And this looks like this is Justine Barrow, who is staying hard on the pedals, and she's trying to break their spirit. Bree Vine is looking to try and stick with them as well. This race,
Justine Barrow is just counter-attacked. Yeah.
She's counter-attacked herself.
Justine Barrow is just counter-attacked. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get out. Pretty impressive.
It is. So to Nicole Frayne, Vicky Whitelaw just rejoins at the back, and that was a big effort to make contact once again at the back of the group. And look who else is there. Eliza Politis, the 17-year-old, has maintained contact at the back. So we have the full spectrum of the age groups within this contingent. We have the 40 or 40 plus of Justine Barrow and the teenager of Eliza Politis. And this shows the strength and the depth of Australian cycling. It's great to see such an age span towards the front of the race.
Yeah, and a lot of Sydney Uni Staminade riders in that group of 5 there as well. It looks like there's about 3 of them, with also Brie Vine and Justine Barrow right up there. So it puts them in a really good position, with also having Hayley Fuller up in that two-man breakaway with Brie Wilson, and that gap is still holding at about 25 seconds with about less than 5K to go now. So I think and I hope that these two ladies are going to stay away today.
You went up an octave when you said, I think.
Well, I hope.
They deserve to. These two certainly deserve to take the prizes today. And if there was some justice, it would be Hayley Fuller who takes the stage, Brie Wilson who takes the series lead. But that's not how it works. It is just whoever gets there first, and it will be Brie Wilson doing everything she can to win the stage and take as much time as possible on her rivals for the overall standings.
Yeah. And yeah, especially with the stages coming up, but Brie Wilson will definitely be thinking about the overall, I think. And it's a little bit harder when it comes to sprinting and knowing when the other's going to go, when you can't really hear their gear changes and things like that. So whoever wins, I think today is just going to be the faster and more experienced rider on the stage. And also, depending on who might have one of those Aero Boost power-ups or draft boost as well.
Yeah, it will be a real battle of strength. 37.4 kilometres the race around Watopia as they make their way through the famous jungle circuit. We're just on 4 kilometres remaining. Everybody on a mountain bike today because of the dirt that they're going across. Our two leaders, one of the youngsters in the pink colours, that's Hayley Fuller from Sydney Uni Staminade, and she's with Brie Wilson of the Rock Salt Attacker team, who's moving herself to the top of the general classification. Their advantage is still at 43 seconds over the group that contains Justine Barrow, who won race number 2 and started this race as the series leader. It won't be by the close of business today.
Yeah, that chasing group of 5 riders is a really strong chasing group, but they've got 45 seconds to try to bring back in 4K, which I don't think is going to happen today, but definitely been a very impressive ride by these two ladies. I don't think any of us predicted that the winning move would go on lap 2 of this jungle circuit, but they went early and took them by surprise and have been riding a super impressive race.
Yeah, I thought it would be a small group and perhaps a breakaway, but on the last lap, there's no way I expected an under-19 rider such as Hayley Fuller to be the one who forced the move and broke away so early and then would be able to hold everybody off. And her and Brie Wilson together have been outstanding.
Yeah, and we're just seeing the power numbers that they're riding at now, and they're in the numbers of around that 300 watts and 180 beats per minute, which is pretty impressive coming from any rider, yet alone a junior. So definitely has been an amazing effort, especially for such a long race too. They've almost been racing now for 55 minutes, which is a long race in Zwift, and just makes this effort even more impressive to hold off this chasing group that is a very high caliber with like Vicky Whitelaw. Yeah. She's won stages in the Giro d'Italia before.
Yeah, these sort of numbers that Hayley Fuller are producing are motivating me to ride anonymously on Zwift. And Dennis Shaw is joining the conversation via the Zwift Community Live on Facebook, and he's made the note that she's now taken, Hayley Fuller, the Queen of the Mountains segment on this course, which is impressive. So she'll get the fastest lap jersey for the jungle circuit.
Yeah, everyone likes unlocking those or getting those jerseys, but that's what that little symbol means next to her name too. Brie Wilson has a little jungle one at the moment as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Brie Wilson. Impressive. And there's the comment from Dennis Shaw. I love the fact I think Dennis is around about 70 years of age, former winner of the Melbourne to Warrnambool. He's Pat Shaw's father. He is that obsessed with cycling. He's loved it his entire life. He still rides regularly on Zwift. He's pretty keen to do a few races on Zwift, which he has been doing. And he gets upset when he gets beaten by people who are 50 years younger than him.
No, it's awesome to see such the variety of people Swifting. And yeah, I think it's really hard to just jump on Zwift and then end up doing a recovery ride, because most times you end up racing someone. But you're going to be seeing these riders are going to be coming. Very true.
Okay, here we go. We're down to just over 1 kilometre remaining. 37.4 kilometres is the race today. They've just clicked over 36.4 kilometres covered. It is a 2-up battle between Bree Wilson, who sits at the back, and she's got that drafting power up in effect, and Hayley Fuller is the rider who's at the front.
Yeah, interesting that Bree, it looks like Bree Wilson is using her power up now it was a little bit too early leading into the sprint. So I would have held off on that and waited for the last couple of 100 meters, but they have less than a K now, and they're going to be seeing the finish line quite soon. And we know that Bree Wilson has used her power up. So it'll be interesting to see if Hayley Fuller has one.
Well, she now goes to the front. So the youngster, Hayley Fuller from Sydney Uni Staminade, is at the front. Bree Wilson, who will be moving into the overall series lead, she now returns to the head of the race. They're inside the last 500 metres. This has been a fantastic performance between the two of them. Fuller, who took out 2 gold medals at the Australian National Championships in Ballarat at the start of the season, is locked in a battle with Bree Wilson, who now opens up the afterburners, and she's out at more than 10 watts per kilo. But Fuller, she does have the lightweight power up, and she's up to 11 watts per kilo. The youngster strategically has nailed it with the power up, and she's burst her way across the line to take the win. Outstanding performance by Hayley Fuller. And now the race is on for the minor placings and to see what the time gap is.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting sprint for third, with the riders of Justine Barrow and Vicky Whitelaw really contesting this GC, as we're just waiting to see where they might be in terms of the finish line now. But what an awesome sprint by Hayley Fuller.
Brilliant. The timing is going to be all important for Bree Wilson. Bree Wilson is going to move into the overall series lead. Justine Barrow should have enough to hold on to second place in that series. She's looked really strong at the front of that group. Vicky Whitelaw also at the front. It looks as if Vicky Whitelaw might be just coming across the line for third place on the stage. Eliza Politis, the next best, then Justine Barrow, Bree Vine, Nicole Frayne also in that group. It has been a big battle, but the 2 stars at the front, without question, Hayley Fuller and Bree Wilson, have been outstanding.
Yeah, and just looking at that sprint between those 2 riders up the front, Hayley Fuller got to a heart rate of 196 and Bree Wilson 189. So those heart rates I've never seen coming from my heart rate meter, but it was a really impressive finish by those 2 ladies, and a perfect use of the power up, that aero boost power up by Hayley Fuller.
Well, maybe being younger, having the gaming experience is actually more experience on this format than being an older rider that is more accustomed to actually racing in the real world. But either way, Carlee Taylor, Hayley Fuller takes out the stage. The young star has very much arrived, and Bree Wilson now moves into the series lead with still 5 races to go. There's a long way to go in this series, and anything can happen.
Yeah, I think though it does put her in a handy lead. They did have quite a big gap in that last lap, and she is a really strong hill climb and time trialist as well. But yeah, it was really awesome to see Hayley Fuller there take out the win. I think if it comes to racing, that's kind of like how you always like to see a breakaway, with both riders almost winning, Bree Wilson as in getting the yellow jersey and Hayley taking the win. So it was nice that both of them really got something out of such an awesome effort today.
Let's take a look at that sprint once again and the timing to perfection of Hayley Fuller. We saw the power up used early by Bree Wilson, and they're punching out more than 10 watts per kilo. And then Hayley Fuller, she just burst through to the front at just the right moment. It was awesome timing by her, Carlee Taylor. A lot to like about her for the future. We're going to take a short break and then come back with the men's race, but I want one highlight from you, Carlee Taylor.
I think it would have to be how Hayley Fuller was riding the front that first lap and a half, and then when Bree Wilson went, she just covered and then took out today's win. You can't go past her ride for today, and I think that definitely has to be my highlight.
Yeah, it's hard to go past that performance by the youngster taking out the stage victory. So it's on to the running machine for you to up your Zwift numbers as a runner, because you're only on level 14 at the moment. And then Pat Shaw is going to join me for race number 3 in the men's race. Until next time, Carlee, see you later. Keep running and keep riding. Ride on.
Thanks for having me, Matt, and look forward to watching the men's race.
For race 3 in the Zwift National Road Series. Matthew Keenan with you, joined by Pat Shaw after what has been a brilliant race in the women's event with Hayley Fuller taking out the victory. Bree Wilson moving to the overall series lead. Pat, you were tuning in. So too was your dad, Dennis. Are you ready for the men's race?
Oh, certainly am, Matt. And I must say, you're going to be surprised at the leaderboard, I think, after this stage for the women's. That's really shaken things up because the finishing position of Vicky Whitelaw, the insertion of Alicia Polides into the top 10 on the general classification as well. So we not only have Hayley Fuller as something to be really surprised with today and a great performance of a young rider, but also Alicia Polides. She slid into the top 10 as well. So a bit of a shake-up there, but yes, Bree Wilson will take over the lead. But that was a brilliant performance, and it was such great performance to watch. We can't sort of push Bree Wilson to the side because she was just as formidable at the front.
Yeah, she was fantastic. In terms of the men's race, last week we saw your old team, the Bridge Lane team, dominate. They took first, second, and third, and that's how they sit in the overall standings. It was such a strong performance by Alistair Christie Johnson to win last week, and that's enough to move him to the top of the overall standings. He leads ahead of it, Ben Van Dam, it's then Ben Hill, and they're all locked together on the same time with a 2-second gap then to Jay Vine, followed then by your man at just 3 seconds behind. Another one of their teammates, Nick White, is in 5th position. Cooper Sayers, Tom Benton, Graham Frisley, the winner of the first race, Tyler Lindorf and Alistair Donahue round out the top 10. But the Bridge Lane team, Pat, they're in such a dominant position.
Yeah, they certainly are, but let's keep in mind we've got the Bologna TT coming up in about 4 weeks' time, so we're racing every fortnight, and that's really going to shake up the classification quite a lot. Sure, Bridge Lane do hold 4 of the top 5 positions on the general classification at the moment, but a lot can be changed with that time trial in Bologna, and it's actually the stage I'm most looking forward to. We've lucky in store today, actually, live Nick White's racing. So he's here, and there's a fair few customers out there watching him. So hopefully he gets in a good performance today.
Have you been communicating with him? I imagine you have been having a bit of a chat with him in the last half hour or so. How is he?
Oh, yeah, he's pretty relaxed. I don't really get involved too much with the riders as far as that's concerned. I like them to try and handle those situations themselves and sort of learn from them. I mean, Nick's probably a little bit of a different case because he is pretty much a winner. Like, he has had great victories before, but I like athletes that I'm dealing with to sort of learn how to deal with certain circumstances. And then in the aftermath, we discuss ways they could have better prepared or better handled situations, as Brendan Davids from Oliver's Real Foods already on a surge here. And we're going to see a lot of this today after the women's race, Matt, which was just really entertaining. I think we're going to see the men go ultra aggressive in this stage and try and split it up a bit. Even on last fortnight's difficult course, it really didn't break up until the final climb. And it was Jay Vine who surged to the front, but he ran out of gas, and it was Alistair Christie Johnson that came over the top. It would be interesting to see how Alistair performs on this course today.
Yeah, the men's race, they've covered 7.4 kilometres of a 37.4 kilometre race, and it's been a pretty aggressive start, and that is no surprise. But it is slightly longer than we've seen in some of the other races of this series. It's the famous Watopia through the jungle, and it is a predominantly gravel course, Pat, and it's lumpy.
It's predominantly gravel. It's lumpy, and probably the stage profile doesn't give it justice at just how lumpy. You're looking at around about 3.5 kilometres of climbing per course. Yes, this is a much better graph now. 3.5 kilometres to 4 kilometres of climbing per lap, and it's at an average of around 4%, peaking out towards the top in that second dip there at around 6%. So it is difficult, and that's why we saw in the women's race Hayley Fuller and Bree Wilson that got an early lead, and they worked at an extremely higher rate in that front group of 2 than what the peloton did, and that's why they were able to surge so far ahead. And we can see that they're going to tackle this climb for the first time now. 4% is the incline, and we can already see pressure being applied from the Oliver's Real Foods team with both Brendan Davids, and I think I saw up there as well Liam White very close by. Oliver's Real Foods, for mine, along with Aidan Sinclair, have been really high performing in the first few rounds, Matt, but they just haven't nailed a good result, so potentially today could be the course for them.
Well, one of the riders from their team, I've been taken into the pain cave of Jesse Fentonby. His dad, Greg, has sent me a video of Jesse on the bike just as they get started. He's got the perfect setup. He's got the towel draped across the handlebars to catch the sweat. Dad, who rode the Sun Tour plenty of times in the 1980s, is there encouraging him. So let's see how Jesse Fentonby goes from the Oliver's Real Food Racing. Good luck today, Jesse. Dad is right there behind you, but he can't push the pedals for you. Mark O'Brien, though, is putting plenty of pressure on at the front of the race. Pat, that's no surprise. It's Mark O'Brien.
Oh, and there was plenty of chit-chat going back and forth. Of course, you can see some of the chat and also pictures on ZC Live, so Zwift Community Live on Facebook, so go and check it out. And comment as well, and we can take on some of those questions or comments through the live feed. But Mark O'Brien and Cam Roberts particularly were coming back and forth, talking about bike selection, and Mark O'Brien implied that wouldn't bother Cam Roberts what bike Mark O'Brien would be riding, particularly when Cam Roberts was 1 minute behind him. So there hasn't been any lack of fighting words before the start, Matt Keenan, and I was quite enjoying the juicy conversation pre-start. So they haven't mucked around at all. 9.1 kilometres in under 12 minutes, and Mark O'Brien doing what he does best, and that's annoying people off the front. He's surging at 7.4 watts per kilo, and who's chasing him back? None other than Cam Roberts.
It's on. So they've gone from a verbal stoush to a physical stoush. Mark O'Brien, strategically, he used a power up just near the top of that climb to try and force the gap. That can be really important in this race. And Pat, we saw it on Tuesday night in the SRAM Send It series. And then in the women's race with Hayley Fuller just a moment ago, how important it can be at the end of the race in the sprint finish.
Yeah, certainly. And for those that don't know about the power-ups, potentially if you're watching, you don't use Zwift as a platform. The Aero power-up, which we just saw pop up on screen, that's the Aero helmet, and it makes you more aerodynamic for 15 seconds. Obviously, in the previous race, that was the asset that got Hayley Fuller the victory after a great race. The Draft Boost, which looks like a van in the shape of a van, it increases your draft effect by 50% for 30 seconds. The Breakaway Burrito, the best named boost, that looks like a burrito, and that makes you undraftable for 10 seconds. And the lightweight power-up's going to be used quite a lot today, as we see the van, the draft boost being popped there by one of the riders. But the lightweight reduces your weight by 9.5 kilograms for 15 seconds, and it shows in the form of a green emblem with a white feather. As we see Aiden Sinclair, where's he at the moment? Looks like
he's fighting
a little bit off the back.
He is fighting. He's fighting his way to get back on. This is a chance for us to take a look at some of the damage that has been done. He's sitting in 47th position. Pat Eddy, one of the junior stars of Australian cycling. Sam Jenner is also in this group. This is the chasing group. And this race, the first time up the climb, just as we saw in the women's race, has been blown to smithereens. 23 seconds the gap for those guys.
Too. Yeah, Frisley, he's up in that front group still, though, and Tasman Nankervis were back here, as you said. Sam Jenner, he's a big name. Trekkie Johnson right there as well. Finton Conway in there. Jay Felke from Sassy is also there. And Pierce, well, this is a pretty significant group. Taj Jones back there as well. Now we head back to the front group where we can see Ollie Stenning, he's in there. Tyler Lindorf, Brendan Davids, who's been the instigator of a lot of this aggression early on. And again, not surprisingly, should I say, after his performances over the last weeks, but how good is it to see Graham Frisley evolving, Matt Keenan? Because
yes.
Previously we probably would have seen a pimple, what we'd call a pimple or a speed up, and expect Graham to be sort of struggling to hold on. But now his front group, this group of 24 riders, and he's well and truly in there and causing some trouble for them as well.
This is really starting to feel like a breakout season for Graham Frisley. He sits in 8th position in the overall standings. And last week with that, or not last week, but a fortnight ago, with the after party in New York, he only lost a few seconds on Alistair Christie-Johnson. He is at 5 seconds behind, sitting in 8th position overall. And Graham Frisley, he is becoming a force to be reckoned with on any course. Previously, Pat, we'd only talk about him as a contender in a road race if he fronted up at a criterium. Now we're talking about Graham Frisley as a contender at any road race.
Oh yes, and fair so too. I mean, I've really been looking forward to this moment for him because you and I often talk about the upcoming talents, and sometimes we're talking about them for 24 months before anyone else is really talking about them in the open racing. But it's great to see. Much like we just saw Hayley Fuller have a great performance and Alicia Polides in the women's race. And it's great to see these riders coming through and pushing forward to the front. You spoke about Pat Eddy before. Unfortunately, he's in second group this morning, but he's been actually quite a strong performer already in the series as well as one of the younger riders. Will Golding from South Australia has been really showing something too. So it'll be interesting to see what he can perform on this race today.
This group is pretty small pretty early on, Pat. There's not a lot of riders that are in contention in this group now.
No, but evidently we see a lot of the green Olivers jerseys. So there's 3 or 4 of those riders in there. We also see quite a few of the Bridge Lane. Cam Ivory's in there. Alex Lack, who you and I have been having quite a few discussions about Alex recently. He's also another rider who's performed on the mountain bike scene before, but with GPM Stulz, his National Road Series team, he's now having the ability to also perform on the road side of the sport, the discipline of road cycling. So I'm really interested to follow Alex Lack over this next 6 to 8 months, Matt Keenan. He's a rider that really interests me. The White brothers both in there. Jesse Norton, great to see him in there. Young fella from Ballarat as well. Luke Cridlin, a rider that I raced with in under 11s, believe it or not, Matt Keenan. So he's in there as well. And Tyler Lindorf, he is another rider who really excites me for the future in Australian cycling.
Yeah, for sure. We'll be keeping a very close eye on him. 3 laps to go. They've already covered 14 kilometres of the 37.4 Ks. This has been a frenetic pace on board with Alex Lack, the rider that you just spoke about. His heart rate is up there pretty high at the moment, though, Pat, approaching the 190 beats per minute mark. I'm not exactly sure what his threshold is at, but it's got to be pretty close.
Certainly, and maybe a little bit of an omen for him today with the mountain bikes being equipped for the riders as we head back to that second group. 42 seconds, and guess what, Matt Keenan? That gap will only grow because evidently on this course, and as we saw earlier in the women's race, you can close the gap down once or twice, but after that, she starts to blow out pretty quickly. And at 40 seconds, I can only see that continuing to grow. Aidan Sinclair, well, he's trying everything to stick on here, and he has been quite impressive in the series already. But I think today he might have met his match.
This is the group that contains Pat Eddy. And how horrible is it when you're actually riding Zwift yourself and the computer just pops up with the message, close the gap? I'm trying to close the gap.
Yeah. Also, like when you're doing one of the training programs and it says lift your cadence and you're absolutely digging for every pedal stroke. More power. That's the one that I get quite often. But we're not worried about what you and I need to do. We're worried about what these riders. How is this pace at front? 19 minutes, 15 kilometres covered, and 100 metres of elevation gain. So it hasn't been flat, as we're aware of on this course. Very unforgiving. We can see those lightweight power-ups being pushed in that front group, and they will be a main player because, as we saw on the SRAM Send It series on Tuesday night, those that didn't have the lightweight power up really did struggle to perform towards the end of the race. So they are crucial to a result. And one of the interesting things I wanted to actually bring up today, Matt, and this is probably a good chance to do that with some of the bigger riders, bigger known riders being dropped. If you finish in the top 3 in any of these National Road Series rounds, you need to film a live call with Zwift and do a weigh-in post-race. So a lot of the riders are travelling with scales. This morning when Nick White came into the store, he brought scales with him in the case that he does finish in the top 3. So if there's anyone out there worried about legitimacy behind the top 3 in particular, there is always live weigh-ins post-race to verify the weight in which the riders have said that they are weighing in at.
We need to take them down to Flemington so as we can have the course announcer say, correct weight.
Yeah. Yes, except would they weigh in with their saddle? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, okay. We can go to Ballarat and visit Michelle Payne and her family and see if we can get in on correct weight. We've got 32 riders remaining in the front group as they start the second lap. There's not a lot of riders remaining in the front group. That shows how tough the opening lap was, and a lot of it caused by the guy we're focusing on now, Mr. Experienced, Mark O'Brien.
Yes, Mark is a rider that does like an aggressive race, and some would say he's aged well because he hasn't really dropped off in performance for probably a decade. He still maintains the same performance rate as what he did in his early to mid 20s, and he's really showing here today that this is a course and this is the type of race that really suits him. Right behind him, Ben Van Dam, who I thought was probably, even though he didn't win last week, he was second on the stage, but he really performed a great team role as well. He applied pressure last round, should I say. He applied pressure on the points of the race that were really important and brought back some of the early breakaways, but then he was still able to perform really well and finish it off with a second place, and that finds him in that same place on the general classification overall. He'll also time trial well on the Bologna TT course in 4 weeks' time. So really excited to keep an eye on Ben Van Dam's result today.
He looks pretty good here at the moment, riding towards the front, as to, again, is Mark O'Brien, who, incidentally, Pat, didn't he announce his retirement about 5 years ago? And he's just dropped it back to doing 20,000 Ks per year.
Yeah, Mark O'Brien, even in retirement, it's not really a retirement from cycling. He always punches out a lot of kilometres. He's a coach of many of the best upcoming riders, and it's been fantastic to be a teammate of his in the past, and I can vouch for his knowledge of the sport and also his pedigree as a coach. So he certainly does a lot of kilometres with the riders that he coaches, but he also, I think he likes a bit of that, I'm coaching you, you're getting results, but let's go for a ride, I can still half wheel you type thing.
I think you can do, I can do better. Well, he's certainly applying a lot of pressure at the front, and it is a format that suits him. Just on 30-odd riders remaining at the front of the race. Across the bridge, 17 kilometres covered, down to 20 Ks still to go. Race number 3 in the Zwift National Road Series of Australia. The series leader at the moment is Alistair Christie-Johnson from Team Bridge Lane. He was the winner of race number 2, and he leads, but on equal time, just ahead of his teammates, Ben Van Dam and Ben Hill. The next best at just 2 seconds behind in the general classification is Jay Vine, followed then by Nick White, who's in the shop in Ballarat with Pat Shaw. He's at 3 seconds off the pace. It's then Cooper Sayers, Tom Benton, who we know has got really good form on this format, Graham Frisley, who's been so impressive in 2020, Tyler Lindorf, and then Alistair Donahue rounds out the top 10.
Yes, and probably the series leader, Alistair Christie-Johnson, looks like the best probable performer on that time trial course in Bologna. So he's in a really strong position as we see Wendy May. Hi, Wendy. It's good to see you on the stream. Come on, Team Bridge Lane. Always been a huge follower of the team, but equally the other teams that are in the series as well. So it's great to see Wendy tuning in. And
Wendy Superfan doesn't discriminate. She supports everyone. She's one of the best things to happen to Australian cycling in the last couple of years. She's been fantastic for cycling.
Yes, but in the defence of her favourite rider of all time, Richie Port, he was her first real. She was his first fan. Right. That's where Wendy Superfan started. She started following Richie because she's from the same area in Tasmania as Richie, and then notably because Andrew Christie-Johnson from Tasmania. He's got the team Bridge Lane, which was previously known as other names as well. She followed those teams as well first, and then she slowly started to follow the Australian track team, etc. She's a huge supporter of all cycling in Australia. This is the Chase group, now a minute 40. Yes. As we said, Matt Keenan, it's not going to get any shorter.
Brendan Johnson, who is the real-life leader of the National Road Series, as opposed to Alistair Christie-Johnson, who leads on Zwift. But the man who won the Melbourne to Warrnambool this year, he finds himself in the second group, or perhaps even a little bit further back than that is he at the moment. He's got some ground to try and make up. He's in the chase group.
Yeah, certainly. He's just trying to make that surge, but at a minute 40, there's not a lot you can do. Brendan Davids applying pressure again for Oliver's Real Foods on the front of the group. Around 75 to 80 revs per minute on that little bit of an incline as they now go down the dip here. Oh, this is a really tough course, Matt Keenan, and this is really going to test them out towards the end. We saw in the women's race that it was the aero power-up in the finish that really was the last, perfect move, in fact, by Hayley Fuller to take the stage. And certainly I think that anyone with an aero power-up towards the end of today's stage is really going to come out on top.
Pat, the experience of racing on this platform on Zwift can be so important, and the name that keeps popping up near the front but never on the front so far has been Jay Vine.
Oh yes, Jay's really what we'd call a Zwift professional, and he really does perform well on the platform. But as you said, knowing the courses and knowing Zwift is important too. And notably on the Innisbrook course just the other night for the SRAM Senate Series, there is 2 opportunities to get a power-up, one at the start-finish line and one 2 kilometres from the finish line, or 2.5, should I say, at the sprint point. And a lot of riders that don't do a lot of Zwift racing wouldn't have realised that. They would have been saving a power-up up the climb, and then that's being detrimental to their finish result. So knowing where you can pick up power-ups is really crucial, and the riders that are best informed about that will come out on top. And for those wondering what the glowing part in the back pockets of the riders are, they're not broken gel wrappers that have tripped onto the jersey. They're ride-ons. So they compile in the back of the jersey. So when you give a rider kudos, which is known on Zwift as a ride-on, that slips into the back pocket. So you can see some of the riders towards the back are some of the favourites of the people watching along the Zwift platform.
Just noticed the name of Jesse Fentonby still in this leading group. His dad, Greg, sent me the video of Jesse in the pain cave at home, just preparing as they're about to roll out. I'm glad to see that the rider from Oliver's Real Food Racing is still in contention with this leading group. Here we focus on him now, and based on the numbers, he looks as if he's doing okay. 153 beats per minute his heart rate. No problem. He's got plenty of room to go.
Yeah, really good course for Jesse, I feel like. Being predominantly an uphill circuit now that we're on the laps sector of the course. And certainly if you've made this selection, your form's obviously really good as well. As we see, it's a very select front group, around 31 riders remaining. And at the moment, it's Luke Cridlin that's got the fastest lap. And you'll see that pop up on the side of the standings next to his name occasionally when he pops up in that front part of the group. He has that black little jungle emblem next to his name, and that signals that he has the fastest lap time at the moment. I'd suspect the final lap of the race will be the fastest though, Matt, and potentially will change hands.
In the women's race, we saw Bree Wilson take that title, and so she's got that now next to her name on this course, which is one of the most famous courses on Zwift. On board still with Jesse Fentonby, who is looking pretty comfortable. 159 beats per minute, and Jesse Fentonby is going okay. You can join the conversation on social media, Zwift Community Live. We're taking a look at some of the comments coming in as well. We know that Wendy Superfan is watching, and she's following very closely the crew from Team Bridge Lane, who are well positioned in the overall standings, occupying the top 3 placings, with Alistair Christie-Johnson at the top of the table. And in race number 2, Pat, I thought Jay Vine had it all wrapped up, and I was ready to go with the big crescendo, but Alistair Christie-Johnson, he got the timing just right, and Jay Vine, he faded into 4th.
Yes, he did, and we've touched on it slightly after when we had a live interview with Jay. We were lucky to have the live cam alongside him for the race, and he took ownership of it. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there that I would have known that would have said, even if it didn't, would have said, oh yeah, no, there was a bit of a technical glitch. I was in the front, it dropped out, that's why I got caught. But he just said, no, I just went too early, I blew up. and then I just hung on for fourth.
Yeah, I liked it. It was not a mechanical, it was a physical. I really did like it. A few power-ups now being used. We've seen the drafting. This is a move at the front. It can't possibly, can it? It is. It's Mark O'Brien once again. And this is not a replay of laps 1 and 2. This is Mark O'Brien doing it again.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy, but he tends to be antisocial in these situations and tries to get away. Wouldn't be surprised to see the next most antisocial rider in the peloton, Ben Hill, trying to get across. He's right up the front. We can see the long list of Bridge Lane riders they're compiling together. Nick White, Tyler Lindorf, Ben Hill, and Ben Van Dam all getting around each other. So they're a bit concerned about Mark O'Brien. And even though he's one of the older riders in the race series, he's probably going to still perform a pretty strong TT on the Bologna TT. He'll climb extremely well for the back end of that course, and being only 8 kilometres, I think that really suits him.
He's a fair way down in the overall standings. I couldn't quite find him inside the top. He's not certainly not inside the top 20 in the general classification, Mark O'Brien. So he's not an immediate threat to the race leader, Alistair Christie Johnson. But he's not a rider that you want to let back into the frame. He's opening up a gap now of 4 seconds, but Marco is all by himself. He'd like some company, and Pat, your man, Jesse Norton, is at the front, leading the chase.
Yeah, we've really looked at this course for Jesse, actually, one of the better ones for his current physical state. So a lot of these younger riders, Matt, they struggle on the flatter courses because it's more of a pure power race, where today and again the Bologna TT will be a good opportunity again for the younger riders that produce a really good watts per kilo average, but they just struggle a bit at that sort of 500 to 600 watts pure power. And we've seen that in the first weeks of the series, that we see a few under-19s pop into the top 10, but it's really difficult to win one of these stages. So it's very positive to see still a couple of young riders in the front group, and Jesse being one of those it's really good today.
Zenovic is now making a move. He's punching out almost 8 watts per kilo. This is a big attack. He's opened up a little bit of a gap on the remnants of the peloton.
Matthew Zenovic from New Zealand. He's a strong rider, and actually he and Mark O'Brien, both teammates of mine the same year, so they know each other as well, and this could be a good little duo to get to the front. Zeno's not one to back away from doing his fair share of the work either. He rides for the St. George Continental team this year, and he's definitely a rider that this course suits. So Zeno, as he's known to his friends from New Zealand, he's putting in a strong performance now. And look at the gap opening up, Matt Keenan. Going to have to be a bit of a surge from behind. Lindorf, Van Dam, they go to the front with Cam Roberts and Bennett there as well for Van Dam Racing. But this gap, we saw it happen in the women's race. It can open up quickly.
Well, Zenovic is closing really quickly on Mark O'Brien. That's an impressive ride. He's a strong time trialist, Matthew Zenovic, and he has made contact. So O'Brien and Zenovic, two of the more experienced riders in the race, have got themselves a gap on the peloton, which is being led by Liam White of Oliver's Real Food Racing. Their advantage is 7 seconds, Pat Shaw. It's not a lot, but it's enough for these two to work with. It's looking dangerous.
Yeah, well, it's effectively 150 metres. They get on the faster part of the course here with a downhill segment before the 6% incline on the other side. And now we see this is a really smart use by Lindorf, the aero power-up. So he goes to the front, but he's actually leading out the rest of the peloton in a lot of regards. So that's going to give him a better aerodynamic ability for 15 seconds. So that should bring that gap down to the front group ever so slightly. The faster parts of the course, like the downhill sections and the flat sections, will obviously be an advantage to the bigger group because they've got more draft capability. But certainly on the hillier section, it all comes down to who's got it in the tank. And we can see now the peloton surging behind. It was the move from Lindorf using that power-up, the aero power-up on the bridge, that's really reduced that gap back down to around 70 metres.
But he's clawed back in terms of time at least 2 seconds on O'Brien and Zenovich. It was 7 seconds when we saw Tyler Lindorff go to the front. It's now down to 5 seconds. But they've got slightly, and I say slightly in inverted commas, fresher legs back in that peloton because O'Brien and Zenovich have made a really big effort to open up the gap on that climb. But they're getting a bit more of the drafting effect back in that main group, and the advantage has been reduced by another second. It's now down to 4 seconds, the lead for Mark O'Brien and Matthew Zenovich.
Yes, and what we're seeing back in the peloton is a good sharing of the work on the front. So it's not just one team or one rider, but everyone's really taking ownership. And I think that's because on this jungle circuit, obviously if you're part of this group, you've got good legs anyway, but it's one of those circuits that can produce surprise winners. And in that regard, I think a lot of the riders, this 30-plus rider group, feel that they have an opportunity today to push themselves to the top of the podium, and why not? So rather than let the race just slip up the road, they're going to, or slip up the gravel path, they're going to push each other up to catch these two riders in front, Mark O'Brien and Matthew Zenovich, and they're going to try and see that on this final lap, which will come up very shortly, whether they can bring it down to a sprint finish, because there's some really strong sprinters in this group still.
And just as we see in real life racing, it's advantage to the bigger peloton on the descent. And this is the area where they are clawing back that time gap on O'Brien and Zenovich. But Pat Shaw, it looks as if it is Mark O'Brien who is the one at the front who wants to keep applying the pressure, as Matthew Zenovich, the Kiwi with the St. George team, is being reabsorbed by the peloton.
Yeah, well, it's one of those decisions you've got to make in real life racing as well as on the virtual platform of Zwift, Matt. And that's, do you keep pushing on and potentially when you do get caught, you have nothing left? Or are you happy that we've had a go. I feel good that the legs are there. I still got a little bit in the tank, so I reckon I could follow a surge from someone else later in the race. I'm going to go back to the pack, have a bit of a breather, and we'll try again later. So it's always a difficult decision to make. And well, now that we see Mark O'Brien absorbed as well, we can see that that was a smart move by Zenovich. Sit up a little bit earlier, get that breather, relax a little bit while the peloton's got to close that last 3 seconds gap to you. And now he can look to probably surge again on the final lap.
And it's down to crunch time. We're at the business end of the race. We're inside the final 10 kilometres, race 3 in the Zwift Australian National Road Series. They're in Watopia. It is around the Jungle Circuit, and the overall series leader is Alistair Christie-Johnson from Team Bridge Lane, and he's locked together at the top of the overall standings with two of his teammates, Ben Van Dam and Ben Hill. The next best from Team Aero is Jay Vine, who is threatening at just 2 seconds behind. And Pat Shaw, so far today, Jay Vine has been riding really smartly. We haven't seen much of him.
Yes, well, he along with Ben Hill, we haven't seen a lot of Nick White. We saw Jesse Featonby's in there, but he hasn't really been surging to the front all that much. So a lot of these riders have actually had quite a covered ride with just under 9 kilometres to go. Certainly you would expect that basically everyone in this group is a chance for the victory at the end of today's stage. It's going to come down to the boosts. Who picks up the aero boost through the final sector? That's going to be a really close one. Cam Ivory, he's certainly one you've got to keep an eye on as well from GPM Still's team. He's definitely a rider that isn't foreign to the mountain bike either.
Roberts, I just saw his name pop up near the front. He's always a threat.
Oh, Cam Roberts is an impressive rider, particularly on the Zwift platform, but he also had a really strong finish to the National Road Series in 2019. There's no doubt anytime on Zwift, Cam Roberts is one to watch. I've got to say, though, he's kind of lost, and he won't like me saying this, but he's lost a little bit of shine with just the depth of the fields that have turned up, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. But He certainly is one of those riders, much like Ben Hill. You're always talking about them as being a player for the top five. Yes, they take the occasional victory, but they're going to be a guarantee to be right up the front towards the end of the race. Alistair Donoghue, he has a quick sprint on him, Matt Keenan. He's there. We also saw still Graham Frisley was hanging on. He's going to be a difficult one to beat in a sprint finish if he is to make it all the way.
That's the name I was about to go to, Graham Frisley. We spoke about him early and how impressive he's been this year. 1 lap remaining as they just went through the finishing arch. Frisley was the winner of the opening round, which was a criterium, and he would be a favourite in the real world. He's a favourite on this platform. But he has evolved so much in the last couple of months, the last 6 months really, and his ability to climb now has been impressive. If he survives this climb, Graham Frisley will be tough to beat in the sprint finish.
Oh, 100%. We cannot disagree because he's a tremendous talent. And I think, if anything, he's probably going to look back and think, well, COVID-19, it's not been a great thing across the board, let's be honest. But for him as an athlete, he got on Zwift. He's really got some good confidence behind him. He got that victory in stage 1 of the National Road Series Invitational on Zwift. And I think that's actually been like a real power boost for him in real life too. He's obviously really nailed down on the training, and a Subaru Giant Racing team would be absolutely over the moon with his performances recently. And he's got Jesse Norton in there as well, teaming up with him today, so potentially a lead out there as well.
Yeah, and at the front of the race, your man, Nick White, who's in the shop in Ballarat with Shaw Cycles, is at the front and in with a big chance. So too is another one of the riders you coach, Jesse Norton. This is a very select front group that we're focusing on now. ACJ, the overall race leader, that is Alistair Christie-Johnson.
Yes, and he was impressive a fortnight ago, and looks like he's pretty eager to make a good finishing result today also. It's going to be a close one here on the climb, though. Who can hang on? You sort of could split it straight down the middle of riders in this group that are climber only, and then you've got the other half that are sort of those viable riders that can do a versatile ride of climbing and sprinting. So if you're a rider like Mark O'Brien, you're going to want to punch off the front. Tom Benton, you're going to want to attack as well. Maybe Ben Van Dam, who sits second on the general classification. Liam White in there as well. He can put away a good sprint as well. And Oliver's Real Foods, they have 4 riders in this group, so they're going to have to try something.
Yeah, they've been good. They've been good in this series in total. They've been good over the last couple of years, actually. It's a team that's taken a big step forward. We're now on board with Ben Van Dam. He's the rider that sits in second place in the overall series, but he is locked together on exactly the same time as his teammate, Alistair Christie-Johnson. So it's going to be intriguing to see who becomes the leader of that team outright at the end of this race, because that could be the leader of the series overall. The green colours coming to the front, though, sure. Pat, this is the Oliver's Real Food Racing team.
And what better time to elaborate more on what you were just discussing before. And this team really has overperformed for its budget for quite some time, but particularly the last 2 years has really had a sharp rise, and noticed by Angus Lyons, King of the Mountains jersey winner in Tour de Langkawi. They've won several stages and overall general classifications in Asia. So they're really a strong team, and for a lot of us that follow them, they give us a lot of great thrills throughout the year, particularly in the Asia Pacific region. But certainly when we come back to real life racing in the National Road Series and towards the National Championships back in January 2021, it's going to be a really strong performance for this team. And they're showing that now. It's Brendan Davids, the South African, right on the front. Such a strong rider too. He's nearly 7 watts per kilo on this 1% incline, now 2%, and they're sitting at around 33 kilometres an hour.
And we're starting to see a few moves as well. There's a little bit of a shuffling of the deck. The series leader, Alistair Christie-Johnson, comes up towards the front. The climb is at 3%. They're just on 5 kilometres remaining. This is the business end of the race. It's time for the fireworks.
And I've been talking about the Bologna time trial since week one, Matt Keenan, but hasn't the jungle really produced the goods today? The women's race was a fantastic one. Hayley Fuller, she took it out from Bree
Mark
Wilson.
O'Brien is at the front again.
In the house. Well, he's in the jungle. As much of us would enjoy the Guns N' Roses song, I think Mark O'Brien's probably got it playing in his ears right now. Welcome to the jungle, and I'm about to produce you some real pain. And Mark O'Brien right up the front, still the same people. Ben Hill, Tyler Lindorff, Alistair Donahue right there, and also Tom Benton from Inform Racing. That's Mark O'Brien's teammate, maybe looking for a counter-attack.
Yeah, Mark O'Brien thinks it's his jungle today. He's trying to own it. He has been the most aggressive over the bridge. It's still a big group.
Yes, this is the last
O'Brien
easy section.
up in the front. Lindorff, the last easy section. Ben Van Dam is also towards the front. Quite a few still surviving in this group.
Yes, about 18 riders are left, Matt Keenan. This is the part that really hurts. You come downhill on the bridge, you let off the power off the pedals a little bit. Lactic acid starts releasing, particularly from the ears if you're really struggling. Stenning, he surges to the front, and he's going to put some pressure on. He pops the lightweight power boost. That's been used up now. Who's got another aero power up in their back pocket? We've got the big names there. We've got Cam Ivory. We've got Ben Van Dam, Brendan Davids. But Ollie Stenning, he's the one that's trying to take the limelight today. He surged off the front, 2 seconds gap, which is effectively 80 metres. And it's Tyler Lindorff who's chasing him back with Alistair Donahue and Mark O'Brien.
And less than 3 kilometres remaining. Ollie Stenning it is with the slimmest of margins. Mark O'Brien's name keeps popping up at the front as it has been all day long. Tyler Lindorff with the chase. Plenty of the colours of Bridge Lane. Jesse Fentonby of Oliver's Real Food Racing. His dad will be going bananas as he yells support at him. Famous photo from years ago when Jesse was just a boy and his dad was riding the Sun Tour. The roles are reversed now. Greg is cracking the whip as Jesse Fentonby is trying to take the big prize, and he makes contact at the front.
And don't forget Jay Vine. He's been perfect throughout the series already. Brendan Davids surges, but Jay Vine is still in there. This own group's only got about 18 riders left, Matt Keenan. It's 3 Ks to go. We've got 3 kilometres to go as they go under the bridge there. This is really going to be an exciting finish. And this group, I'm telling you, any one of these riders could take out the victory. Don't forget about Cam Roberts. I said he's lost a little bit of his shine, but can he shine through and be the diamond in the rough today?
And what about Jay Vine, who's been super quiet? Is he just saving to get the timing right on that sprint? We focus on him now. He's still riding a couple of positions back, and he is looking okay. Jay Vine is always one to watch. He's sitting in 15th position.
It's hard to tell with all the dust, but there's been a split, and there's only about 13 riders, about 13 riders that have made it through that split. This is interesting. When you get those dusty conditions, you're not even aware that you're not on the wheel, but they aren't. 2 kilometres to go, Matt Keenan, and it's going to be a ripper finish. They are going at a relentless pace, 35.5 kilometres in 48 minutes. Wow, that is just absolutely flying, 60 kilometres an hour.
And Tom Benton of Inform Make is still in this group as well. He was brilliant in the SRAM Send It series on Tuesday. Liam White is there for Oliver's Real Food Racing. G. Frisley in with a big chance. The winner of stage 1, Graham Frisley, is looking ominous.
Yes, 1.5 kilometres to go, a little less. It's going to be the timing of the power-ups. That's what we talk about every week. The group of riders that are here are all so talented that it's only that 1% that's going to separate them on the line. Who's going to have the power-ups? That's the first one. And who's going to execute it the best? That's the second one. We saw Tom Bolton do it on Tuesday night in the SRAM Senate Series to absolute perfection. We saw the week before Ollie Jones do exactly the same. Who's going to do it today in this field? We don't know, but now we're going to have to see who can take it out. 1 kilometre to go.
Fentonby, He's got himself sitting in 10th position. He is in with the chance at the 1 kilometre mark, waiting to use that power up. But there's a whole host of riders in a similar position. The battle is really on. Sayers is there. Frizzley near the front. Cridlin slipping towards the back. Donahue is in with a chance, Pat.
Oh, certainly. Donahue, Frizzley, Nick White, he's a sprinter as well. Liam White, can he get back for that first week? He punched out the aero power up too early. Could he take the win today? 400 metres to go. They enter the tunnel, and now this is where it's all going to happen on the Picket Plank Bridge.
The throttle is fully open. Mark O'Brien has got himself in the mix. Frizzley could make it win number 2. The power-ups are now starting to be used, and you're seeing upwards of 11 watts per kilo. Cridlin moving through towards the front. Jay Vine now gets his nose up towards the head of the race. It was the tip for Vine to wait for the perfect moment to go, and Jay Vine,
but he's got the wrong boost
through. They're charging
now
the
they
line.
come.
They go over the top. The battle for the finish line is on. And just looking to see who makes it there. Tom Benton, perhaps, has managed to get there just on the line from Frizzley and then Liam White.
Yes, that's how I saw it unfold, Matt Keenan. And unfortunately for Jay Vine, he had the draft boost. The draft boost, not that much of an assist in a sprint like that. And unfortunately, he's probably slipped down to about 9th in the end. But what a race. Absolutely grueling, both the men's and the women's. And it looks like it might be Informs Racing. It looks like Tom Benton. He's taken it out. And Mark O'Brien was aggressive all race, but we'll wait for the results to come through momentarily. But here is the replay. Jay Vine, draft boost. No use when you're not on the wheel. Then the aero power-ups and also the lightweight. And it was the lightweight power-up that did the job here. And it's you can see that Benton, he got past and then he almost surged back past again as we see it now. Benton, Frizzley in the orange, and then Oliver's Real Foods, Liam White filling out the podium.
And Alistair Christie-Johnson just behind Liam White. So that should be enough for him to hold on to the series lead. An impressive performance by him. Tom Benton from Inform Make, impressive. He was so good on Tuesday in the SRAM Send It series. And once again, Graham Frizzley. So 2 youngsters coming up at the front of the race. And for the second race in a row, Pat, Jay Vine has just missed it with the timing of his move.
Yes, but he's always going to have a go, and Cam Roberts very much the same. I think that if you look at the results after today, you'll see that in that front group, there's 5 or 6 under-19 riders or under-23 and under-19 riders. And as we talk about the future and what this Zwift virtual series is offering those riders, I think we're seeing that more than anything highlighted with the results that pop up.
I think maybe Jay Vine got the timing slightly wrong in the same way that I got the timing slightly wrong today, in that I was looking at the kilometre marker, the 37.4. That's what I was looking for. I think he was as well, but the finish line was just a little bit further down the road than that, and he got caught out. Whereas a few of the other guys in the sprint, Tom, obviously, who managed to get the victory, and Graham Frizzley as well in second position, likewise Liam White in third, they read the graphics better to time their sprint.
Well, in fairness, it's a circuit race, Matt, and the riders have passed that location on 4 occasions. So you get it wrong, there's no one to blame but yourself. Much like sprinting with a lap to go, there's nothing worse. But Jay will own it. He owned it last week, and he'll own it again.
Okay, so the results will be up online a little bit later on, but we can confirm that it is Tom Benton who has taken out the win on the stage ahead of Graham Frizzley, and then it was Liam White in third position. Graham Frizzley has been outstanding throughout the season. A win, a second place, is well positioned in the overall standings. We still have, by my calculations, this is only provisional. The results will be up in the next hour or so. We still have Alistair Christie-Johnson at the top of the overall standings, Pat. The next race, which is in a fortnight, is around that famous World Championship circuit of Richmond, Virginia in the US.
Oh, and it is going to be grueling. I love it. And particularly on this platform, you get some huge gaps that really can open up. Aggressive racing will be on the order. And I think Mark O'Brien will really enjoy that too. The climb is perfect for him. And I really look forward to that one. And of course, I'm licking my lips for in 4 weeks' time, Bologna TT. I can't wait, Matt Keenan. And I think as a stream, it'll be the first time we do something like it. And I can't wait.
Yeah, it is going to be exciting. So too will Tuesday with the next round of the SRAM Send It series. As for the National Road Series here on Zwift, to recap briefly, in the women's, it was Hayley Fuller who took out the stage victory. Bree Wilson has moved up into the lead of the overall classification. Tom Benton has won the men's stage. Alistair Christie Johnson is the continuing leader of the series overall. All the results will be up online shortly. On behalf of Carlee Taylor, Pat Shaw, and myself, Matt Keenan, thanks for following the coverage. Don't forget, you can also join the conversation online, make comments throughout the weeks and the lead up to the next race. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time as we head off to Richmond for race number 4 in the Zwift National Road Series.